Welcome everyone to the RITIS user group meeting. We will get started as people join with a little bit of housekeeping information. There are two ways to get audio today, either using your computer or by using the call-in number provided in the email that was sent to you. We are recording this meeting and it will be posted on the RITIS website. If you have technical issues, please contact Esther. You can find her at ecleet@kmjinc.com. Today we'll be using the Q&A box. If you have any questions, you can find that generally at the bottom of your screen in the little toolbar. We will be monitoring this Q&A box, and if we have time, we will respond to your questions verbally. If not, most of the time you'll get a response via text in the box. Everyone is default muted, but you can raise your hand and we can have people chime in to ask questions verbally. With that, I want to introduce Cheryl Bradley of the Eastern Transportation Coalition. She is the TSMO Program Director. Good afternoon, Cheryl.
Good afternoon, Justin. And while I have everyone on here, I want to go ahead and introduce our new program associate, Nicole Forrest, who joined us about a month ago now and is working with us diligently to help us advance our TSMO program. Next slide. Couple of things that have been going on at the coalition or coming up is we had our Travel Information Summit back in April, and we will have our next Waze third-party mapping group in June on the 27th. RITIS, you can see here that we have our meetings in the past. We had our workshop on the 19th and our enhancement group on the 21st, and we will be publishing the dates for the summer meetings coming up. Cross-cutting, we've been doing some great work between our freight work and our TSMO group, looking at what we can do to mitigate the risks of bridge strikes with oversized vehicles. On our transportation data marketplace, we have our next point of contact and technical advisory committee meeting coming up on July 11th. And then in the fall, we'll be hosting our in-person HOGS exchanges, so we'll have those dates out soon. Next slide. So welcome to our meeting. You can see here, so far we have 27 states that are participating in today's virtual event. Those are from DOTs, MPOs, transportation authorities, federal agencies, local agencies, and universities. Next slide. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our co-chair today, Jesse Burke, who is with the who is the manager of the Office of Capital Programs at Delaware Valley Planning Commission, and he will be facilitating the meeting today. So, Jesse, turning it over to you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Welcome, everybody. We've got another great agenda for today's meeting. So just to walk through that, we've already gone through some of the housekeeping items. We're gonna have some really interesting presentations today. We've got the CATT Lab All-Stars with Jason Dicembre on lead vocals doing an analysis of the impacts of the Key Bridge collapse, looking at regional roadway congestion, freight movement, shipping, a lot of different factors from that major incident. We'll also hear from a couple folks with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute about Texas DOT's use of trip analytics. And then Michael Pack, Greg Jordan, and Charles Lattimer are going to also give us a look at nationwide congestion from the April 8th eclipse. You know, a lot of folks traveled to see that event. So some really interesting analysis with the tools to be able to see the impacts of that. As always, we're going to have some updates about new tools and enhancements that are coming together. And as always, we also want to get feedback from everyone on this call. So we'll have opportunities throughout for comments, and we'll close with a feedback session. So a lot of great speakers today. First of all, we have several folks, as usual, from the CATT Lab. We have Michael Pack, who's the director of the CATT Lab, where he works to make transportation data more easily accessible and usable by ops, planners, and researchers. Michael previously worked at the University of Virginia and Oak Ridge National Laboratory. We also have Jason Dicembre, who is the Director of the Office of Transportation, Mobility and Operations at Maryland DOT-SHA. Jason has over 20 years of experience in traffic management operations. He previously served as Division Chief of SHA's Traffic Management Center operations. Jason continues to be a champion for the use of data for real-time traffic incident management operations, and he serves as MDOT's representative on the Traffic Management Center and Safety Service Patrol Pooled Fund Studies, something that the ETC Highway Operations Group manages. And also he's on the AASHTO Committee on Transportation System Operations. Joining us from Texas A&M Transportation Institute today, we have Michael Martin and Joel Thomas. Michael focuses on data wrangling to help provide communities and transportation agencies with data-driven results that are informative and ready to use. Michael's work is centered on applying spatial analysis techniques to mobility and traffic safety problems to produce practical results that help save lives, time, and resources. And Joel Thomas is a lead data analyst at the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. Joel works with transportation data and data platforms to better understand the movement of people and goods. With a focus on mobility, Joel's work incorporates a range of tools and analyses to distill complex patterns into actionable insights for stakeholders and key decision makers. We also have Greg Jordan and Charles Lattimer from the CATT Lab. Greg has a lot of experience. Prior to the CATT Lab, Greg managed a helicopter survey company conducting OD and routing surveys using aerial video to trace vehicles. He also used those results to validate the use of INRIX trip path datasets in origin destination surveys. So Greg's drawn from all those experience to design some new capabilities and features for the trip analytics tools. Charles is a senior faculty specialist at the CATT Lab. He helps transportation agencies improve communication through better data visualization. His roles at the CATT Lab involve promoting user-focused enhancements to the RITIS suite of tools and also shepherding the development of the RITIS signal analytics platform. Between his time spent with the university and private sector, he has over 18 years of experience in transportation data and ITS. He also serves as the vice chair of the TRB Standing Committee for Visualization and Transportation. And last but not least, we have Bob Frey. Bob is the Director of Project-Oriented Planning in the Office of Transportation Planning at the Massachusetts DOT. Bob's worked in a variety of roles at MassDOT's planning office for more than 2 decades. Most recently, one of his focus areas has been vehicle probe and GPS data, and he manages MassDOT's RITIS contract, and he's been participating in a variety of coalition meetings for the last several years. So great group of speakers today, and thank you all for joining us. Next slide, please. So with that, we want to do a couple of polls. First of all, we want to know how often folks attend RITIS user group meetings. Is it once or twice a year, 3 or 4 times a year, or is this your first meeting perhaps? Usually we have a lot of folks that participate pretty regularly. And as always, we appreciate everyone's attendance today. I hope you learned some interesting techniques, get some ideas for analysis that you might do. We'll give that poll a few more seconds to run. Actually, it looks like we have all the polls up at once, so I will read the others as well. The second poll is, how do you use the data and visualization results from RITIS tools? Do you take them directly from RITIS to develop products, reports, maps, and so forth? Do you download the data and use your own in-house tools to create tables and visuals, or do you do a little bit of both? And finally, the third poll is, who's your primary audience for sharing information that was developed from RITIS and PDA suite? So all of these questions help us tailor these presentations better to the ways that you're using the tools and the audiences that you're thinking about when you're doing presentations and analysis. Want to give those a few more seconds? Are we getting close to sharing results on those?
I think we're getting close to critical mass here. I think we'll end it in a couple seconds and move on.
like a pretty even split today among folks that attend somewhat regularly. About a quarter that this is your first meeting, so welcome. Hope you find these presentations useful. As I kind of expected, question 2, a lot of folks do a little bit of both, and some folks just take directly, and some use their own tools. Interesting split in poll 3 there. A lot of folks using the tools for peers or management, but also for executive leadership, elected officials, and the general public. So thanks again. That input's always really helpful for us. So getting right into our presentations here, really interesting presentation on the impacts of the Key Bridge collapse. Again, we have Jason Dicembre from Maryland DOT-SHA, as well as Michael Pack, Greg Jordan, and Charles Lattimer from the CATT Lab. So take it away, folks. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. What we really want to do today is talk a little bit about how we've been using the tools within the RITIS Probe Data Analytics Suite to look at the impacts of this bridge collapse. As you can imagine, not only did it have an immediate impact on that general facility, but all the surrounding areas, including local roadways. So we'll be talking a little bit about how we monitored the roadway activities in the immediacy of the collapse, and then even still today are using these tools to gather data and analyze the effects of the collapse. You can go to the next slide. So just for those who might not be familiar with the facility, it is one of 3 river crossings, bay crossings near Baltimore, along with the Harbor Tunnel and the Fort McHenry Tunnel, 1.6 miles long and about 185 feet clearance below. And on March 26th, we all thought, well, I live in Dundalk, so I'm right near that bridge as a commuter. So I thought I'd be waking up that morning and going to work like any other normal day. But then, next slide, didn't quite go as planned. So next slide, if you can imagine, we immediately started trying to figure out what this was going to mean. We immediately deployed detour routes along with our partner agency, the Maryland Transportation Authority. Some real heroes there in that agency that immediately were able to stop traffic upon becoming aware of the potential strike and saved plenty of lives. But then there was the long-term detour we had to establish for the recovery operation, which we did. But that meant without the facility there, we had some major impacts to the system. I mentioned it's one of 3 crossings there to the Port of Baltimore, which meant now we're down one. And as you can see in the next slide, for daily commuting, about 34,000, previous slide, the next item, 34,000 some vehicles a day, which, in transportation world, we might not think is a lot, but that represented about 15% of the total crossings for commuters, not to mention the impact to commercial traffic. So as you can see on the map here, the Port of Baltimore, there in the center with all of its terminals, including some privately owned terminals, had a lot of containers coming in every day. Baltimore is the highest port in the nation for automobile deliveries. So a huge impact to getting that commercial freight moving. And then Sparrows Point area, the new Trayport Atlantic facility, where there's an Amazon complex, FedEx, several other industrial complexes, unable now to move goods and services back and forth. And as you can see in the last bullet there, the only crossing really safe for hazmat vehicles. So hazmats are not allowed to go through the tunnels. So now the only option would be for them to go the full length of the beltway around to the opposite direction. So we started trying to wrap our mind around what traffic was doing. We had our detour points established, but there was still the question of what are they actually doing? In the day of today, I think everyone on this call is aware, everyone's using their cell phone for Waze, Google, Apple, name your preferred mapping provider. What are they doing? So next slide, the 2 immediate questions we wanted to solve, or answer rather. One, how is traffic responding immediately in that moment? At the time of the collapse on March 26th, Baltimore County schools were still in the spring break timeframe. So we were anticipating that there'd be a little bit lighter volume, but did that end up being a little bit of an assumption and maybe not accurate. We'll see in a few minutes when Michael goes through some of the slides here about the tools we used. And then what was the multimodal impact? So this is not just affecting highways, this is also affecting transit routes. It's affecting maritime routes. Could we determine what that impact would be at a very, very quick, high level glance, not final report level, but trying to get a immediate glance at what's going on. So we turned to a few tools Michael will go over in the next slide, including the daily route performance he did for us, some vessel tracking. We relied heavily on the performance charts tool, and Michael will go through how we kind of used all these different segments inside of RITIS to develop these high-level analysis and dashboards. Go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, Jason. So this is relatively new in RITIS, but a few agencies are starting to use it now, and that we have the ability to make maritime data and air traffic data worldwide available in the system. So right after the bridge collapsed, we're able to see the vessels that were bound for this particular terminal, the big cargo ships. They all had to stop, and they had to rethink what their destination was going to be. So many of them started to just drop anchor before they got even to the Bay Bridge. The Key Bridge is further up. And so, they were stopping, and they just started to loiter, and you're able to see that traffic in real time and see what's going on out on the waterways. Here we've zoomed out a little bit, and we're seeing kind of a larger picture, and I'll talk about it later, but we started to see many of the cargo ships start to divert to some of the other ports, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. During the initial parts of the search and rescue operation, we're able to actually watch the search and rescue vessels move into the area and do different type of search patterns, and move back and forth looking for survivors. And we're able to do the same thing with the air traffic. It's hard to see, but there's some little icons here representing helicopters. And this particular helicopter that I clicked on, you can see its pattern that it was flying around the area right after the incident. So those are things that are available directly in RITIS. Then we also have been putting together these real-time dashboards for the state to use. And essentially, you can come in and create your any set of corridors from any starting point to ending point that you care about, and it'll tell you right now what the current speed is and how that compares to historic conditions. What is it better or worse than normal? If you look over here on the right hand side, the third column, second row, when I took this screenshot, things on 895 were significantly worse than they would normally be in terms of travel times and speeds. And Jason, I believe a version of this is something that you may have used early on. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this was actually the very first tool we turned to, because again, the first question was, what is happening right now? When we're getting that question, from all around, plus needing to know for ourselves, where do we need to send additional responders to? Where is the additional traffic going? And we mentioned a less resilient system. So when we were getting reports of additional, new accidents and stuff like that, 695, 895, 95, should they be all lanes closed incidents, you had another way to go. So we wanted to see what the impact of those was in real time. And we are still using a dashboard that we set up with our own routes developed today.
Right. And we also have dashboards that help the port operations take a look at what's going on. So here on the left-hand side, this is a map of the ports, and you can see which vessels are docked. You can see down here, this is the Key Bridge. This is all the recovery vessels right now. But you're able to see in real time what the turn time and the queue time is for the trucks going to Seagirt Terminal, and compare that to a week ago. and then look at the road conditions going to and from each of the different terminals and see how the traffic is doing and how many vessels are arriving, how many vessels are docked. And you can also see the congestion on the roadways going to the different terminals. We haven't seen any impacts to the airports, but there is an airport dashboard as well, which lets you see the real-time planes and all sorts of other information. And then Jason mentioned earlier, there are transit routes that use the Key Bridge or nearby routes. And so we also have a dashboard that lets us look at the local bus, the commuter bus, light rail, metro subway, and other rail units, and we can see how many buses are operating early, on time, or late, and which incidents or crashes are impacting different routes. So you can see what the impacts on transit are as well. All that's real time. But we also needed to do some quick and dirty analysis to look at before and after conditions at the area. So, using the Probe Data Analytics Suite, you could very quickly go in and draw different routes. Many of you have probably done this before. And you could do a travel time analysis for, pre-bridge collapse to post-bridge collapse. The green is the post-bridge, the day after the bridge collapse. You can see how much worse the travel times were on some of the alternate routes. We also did looking like by day of week, what the before conditions would be like compared to the after conditions on different routes. But these were kind of ugly. And so we wanted to try to put something together that was more like some of our other reporting templates that you all may be using that would allow you to get a prettier view of what's going on. So we started out with this, where we drew a map of the region, and we've got one alternate route shown here. And then we kind of take that dashboard approach where we show you what the travel times were during the AM and the PM peak period of the day prior, and tell you whether it's better or worse, how many crashes and other incidents we're seeing out on this particular route. And we draw a congestion scan as well, so you can see where the worst congestion was during different times of the day. And so we did this for each of the alternate routes. So here's the Fort McHenry Tunnel. Here we have the Harbor Tunnel, 895. And here we have, going a long way around, all the way around the Beltway, and looking at travel times on that. And, these look pretty, but we wanted to get down to business and just look at the individual measurements. So now I'm going to turn it over to Charles Lattimer, who's going to talk about the actual reports that we ended up with.
Yeah, so if I could real quick before Charles starts as he pulls up his presentation. So the first part of what Michael was helping us do was figure out in the immediacy of the collapse what is happening. But then, the dust metaphorically kind of settled a little bit. And I mentioned in the beginning that first week when the collapse happened was spring break. So the following week, that Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, there were a lot of accidents, more than the average. And there was bad weather. It was raining. So even the numbers we were seeing in real time kind of felt like that was not really the new normal. So the next thing became, how can we start tracking things and looking at today to yesterday or to the previous year? How bad is bad really? What is that new normal? And then the second piece was, how do we tell the motorist story? So seeing the data is one thing, but what does that really mean for the motorist experience? And Charles will go over kind of these two different categories of data and then telling that story.
Okay, thank you, Jason and Michael. So yeah, kind of as Jason was mentioning, we put together these there's reports here to kind of with those basically two categories of information. So kind of that regional summary and kind of those travel scenarios. So as we did this, we wanted to really kind of put together something that was modular, something that we could do put together rather quickly, but then it could also be expanded as more information became available. and also as some additional scenarios, in the future may be important to look at. So the way these are both structured is we started off with a kind of a regional summary sheet. Here it starts off here that looks at things in the peak periods. There's one for the AM and PM peak periods that compares everything together. And I'll zoom into this on some later slides so you can see them better. And then for each one of these routes, then we have additional sheets that then drill down and kind of show the details of each one of those routes as they performed over basically over the course of the day. So you can kind of drill down to see more details there. So basically the idea is we wanted something scalable, something that we could add to and do that in the future there. So these are the next one here. So let's take a look at the routes real quick that we looked at. So for the regional summary, so we kind of understand that, that Baltimore, it's kind of at the cross section of several major interstates. So the Key Bridge doesn't really affect all of those equally. So kind of the impacts really kind of depends upon where you're traveling. So we decided to break things up into 3 major corridors to look at impacts there. So obviously there's the I-95 corridor, so kind of moving in this direction. So looking at portions of I-95 and 895 inside the Beltway, and then also kind of this western detour route of 695 around the Beltway. So this would be kind of what your hazmat cargo would take, since they're not able to take the tunnels. The second corridor is what I kind of call the I-70 corridor. Obviously I-70 starts here and goes out to the west. But there is a major freight movement going from the ports here, particularly Sparrows Point and some of the ports that are on the east side of the river, going across to I-70 and then hang out to points west. So we wanted to capture those impacts, either going through the tunnels or the folks who have to go around the outside on the northern half, 695. And then, and thirdly, the I-97 corridor, which kind of comes up just on the east side of the airport and comes up this way. This is kind of almost a mirror image here of the Key Bridge. So you can imagine a lot of people who would be taking the Key Bridge, may not be electing to take this I-97 corridor up through this way. So that's kind of another major diversion route there. Secondly, for the travel scenarios part, we pretty much took 2 kind of low-hanging fruits, just kind of some easy ones to start with. So the first scenario is kind of similar to the first one, but this is really focusing on the through traffic that's going through Baltimore. So either coming from the north or the south on 95, as you're approaching Baltimore, do you continue straight through, or which route do you take? Which tunnel do you take, or if you have to take the Beltway around, how do those travel times compare? Kind of the difference between this and the previous one is we have some common origin and destination points. So kind of what you see there kind of stacks up nicely with each other. And then secondly, we have this kind of the Sparrows Point scenario. So this is a lot of freight traffic coming from the port area back and forth, to I-70 and going out points west. So here's an example of kind of stepping through what the sheets look like. So we wanted to do something very simple to make it easy to put together. So we didn't really go through a kind of an online user interface. This was all put together in Excel, just for speed and development. So what we wanted to do was make an easy comparison among the corridors. So these bar charts, these horizontal bar charts, allow you to scan very easily and make your comparisons there. We went horizontal because we could get some more on the page. I just made it easier for scannability there. We also thought it was important to include context. So what you see here in orange is these are the actual travel times for the kind of these fixed routes for April 29th, 2024. But we wanted to make sure we compared those against representative travel times from the previous year, because we thought that was very important to tell the story. Things maybe, how do they compare to last year? Are they the same? Are they worse? And how much worse? So you kind of need to know what that is there. And we also wanted to make it easy to kind of quantify those differences. So we have a column here for change. So we thought it was important to include both the absolute time, so like the number of minutes, and also the percentages. So depending upon the length of the road, you know, sometimes the percentages versus the minutes may be more important than others. So, but it's when you put them both together, you get a better idea over, you know, of what the kind of the context of that change. And then we also have like an indicator here too, you know, showing if the change is worse or the same, about the same, or getting better. Okay. Then at the bottom of the summary page, we have a this is a temporal comparison map. So we wanted to show on a regional basis what sections of the road were far worse than usual. And I'll show you in a little bit how we the tool that we use to get this. But you can see here, like on this day, kind of coming through the Fort McHenry Tunnel, coming westbound, we have some, you know, this is much worse than usual. We have kind of the traffic approaching the tunnel here from this side, but also the kind of the traffic leaving the city going kind of northbound down 95 and 895 to this region, kind of these segments. So this allows you to kind of highlight, you know, what particular areas, you know, are experiencing worse than normal conditions. Okay. Let's see. And then as we drill down, this is kind of an example of the kind of the detail sheets. So we use a pretty similar format to what we showed on the overall summary sheets, but instead of like comparing by corridors, we do by time of day. So obviously you kind of ask the question, you know, how bad is traffic, you know, as part of this, but it really depends where you are and what time of day you're looking at. So I'll show you an example here. If you look at the kind of this during the peak period on I-95 inside the Beltway, northbound during that PM peak period, you know, 72% on this particular day, 72% higher than normal, you know, about an extra 12 minutes of traffic. So it took you, instead of about 17 or 18 minutes to make that trip, it took 30 on that particular day. Going the other direction, it was only about 17 minutes. So it's very, very similar to conditions last year. So barely any change. We also show the number of incidents here. So it's possible that this might be due to an incident, you know, perhaps in this direction, but we have to take a look at that and confirm that. But we do have, so if you do see things like that, we do have some indications here that you might want to look further into incidents to see if that might be what's going on there. So, and moving on here to the bottom, we did something a little bit different. Instead of having the temporal comparison map, we showed some basically some travel time, some line charts showing travel time conditions throughout the day. So this is northbound and southbound. You can see going from midnight to midnight over here. We can see that during the AM and PM peak periods, northbound is very clearly has a higher travel time than the previous year. So we can definitely see some impacts there. Southbound also in the morning, but in the afternoon peak, there's really not much difference, at least on this particular day. So that's kind of some interesting things there to make note of. We also wanted to find a way to compare how are things trending. So we do a look back over the past 7 days, and we plot this average travel time over the peak period, the AM and peak period. This is the directions there, compared with last year. And you can see here that even though things are higher than they were this time last year, like in the southbound direction, in this case, it was trending better than the previous week. So that's some encouragement. Hopefully, as people are finding new routes and getting more comfortable with kind of the traffic patterns. Here's an example of the travel scenarios. We kind of run the similar format here. So we tell the kind of the story a little bit of the kind of the Sparrows Point. You know, how that's a kind of a major freight corridor moving between kind of the Sparrows Point and Western Maryland. We follow the same pattern here, showing the kind of the different routes and the current travel times versus the previous year. You can see here that kind of one way to read this. You can see the I-95 is that would be the quickest way to get through. That's the quickest travel time route to take there. But even so, it still took about an extra 15 minutes longer going eastbound during the PM peak than it did the previous year, which is about a 56% increase. So there's definitely some impacts there. So how do we do this? We'll kind of step through this a little bit here. So First off, I want to make a note, a mention of saved TMC sets. So many of you have done, are familiar how to set up queries through RITIS with the different PDA with the different tools there. Something you may not be aware of is once you select your road segments that you want to take a look at, you have the ability to save them as a segment set. So if you're going to be doing repetitive reports using the same segments every day, this is a real time saver. So you can hit this button here after you've after you selected your segments. You type a name for your segment set, and then if you check this box, you can allow users from your agency to also use this set. So this is what I did. I mean, I created a lot of the routes here, the different TMC segments, and then that made it very easy to share this with our data analysts, who are then able to run the reports every day. They can then, so we can then use the same sets. It's very easy to share. It really cuts down on manual data entry and error that way. So when you go to do a future report and retrieve those, you just go over to the saved tab here. You can filter by text here. I named all of these with kind of a common Francis Scott Key Bridge name there, so that you can all find them together. So it makes them very easy to locate. You can also filter by your own segment sets. If you don't do this, you can see sets by other people in your agencies too. So that makes it easy to share those. So I just wanted to make a mention of that. This is the process that we go through on a daily basis to generate the reports that you saw. So this is how we do the kind of the charts and graphs section of it. So we start with using the massive data downloader. So we go through and pick our time periods, and using the same TMC sets, that gets downloaded into a CSV file. Our data science folks have then created a custom script in Python. So they use that to wrangle the data into formats that are then you can then cut and paste into the Excel templates. So our team does that, and then we can then export those as PDF files, which are then easy to share with other people. Finally, the temporal comparison map. Wanted to mention this a little bit. This is one of our newer tools. So if you haven't had a chance to see this, we'll step through this real quick. So what you can do here with this one is this makes it easy to compare performance measures over two different time frames. So what you do here, so I've already gone ahead and loaded in my TMC segments using my saved segment sets that you see here. And then I'll pick two different time periods. So this would be the, say, January 30th. So I'll pick that day, and then I'm going to compare that with every Tuesday in April from the previous year. So that helps to kind of average things out. And, if you try to do a day-over-day comparison, you might have picked a day that had an accident or something. So if you kind of do that like every same day of the week, same month, previous year, that kind of helps kind of normalize things a bit. So we did that. We can select our different time ranges. And then as this is what the report looks like when it comes back. So you get three different views here. So this would be our congestion from the previous year. And then the congestion from April, in this case, it's April 19th here from one day. And you can see very significant congestion here on some of these, coming down 95 and 895 and kind of around this part of the Beltway. This map shows the difference of that. So basically the final minus initial, we can see how kind of our change in congestion. So the pink is congestion that has gotten worse. And a few segments here in blue have actually gotten a little bit better, probably because the traffic was choked off, approaching them. So in terms of the report, what we do is we only want to show kind of those absolute worst case areas. And so what you can do is you can take your temporal map here, and then you can go up to the color scale. And if you double click on each one of these color bars, I went ahead and changed these to white. So that way they kind of blend into the background. And then that leaves kind of that last, kind of that worst case pink they're showing. So in this case, you can see we had the kind of the worst case of congestion was kind of on this the southbound section of 95 through here, and then we had a few little areas on 695 and kind of approaching the Beltway there. So that's kind of the main process that we use to do the reports. And yeah, so I'll go ahead and let me turn things back over to Jason, and we'll kind of talk about some other things we've done.
All right, thanks, Charles. So after we kind of got a sense of the, new normal, if you will, one of the other questions we had, I mentioned one of my last bullets about the impacts we were concerned about is the commercial vehicle movements, especially those that might not be able to go through an alternate crossing like the Harbor or Fort McHenry Tunnel. So we were really trying to figure out what is the commercial vehicle segment doing. And then the next question was, okay, once we get a sense of what commercial vehicles are doing, what routes are they taking? What is the passenger vehicle side doing? So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the data sets that we use to get a general sense of what was happening with freight movements.
So we don't talk a lot about this at these user group meetings, but RITIS has a whole nother section dedicated to sensors that an agency might install out on the roadway that can look at volume, speed, occupancy, even classification of the vehicles. And we also have weigh in motion sensors from Maryland, at least, where we can look at commercial vehicles and passenger vehicles. So this star that's on the map, this is a weigh in motion sensor that was leading up to the Key Bridge. And we could see the passenger vehicle and the commercial vehicles. And then all of a sudden the bridge collapsed. That's where this dashed line is. And then the number of commercial vehicles goes extremely low. And all of these low numbers here, these are actually response vehicles that are continuing on this roadway and going to get to the bridge. Whereas if you look at some of the alternate routes after the bridge collapse, you see some momentary, for about a week, you see the commercial vehicle volumes actually go up a little bit, along with the passenger vehicle volume. Sorry, this commercial vehicle down here, passenger vehicle up here. And you generally see that around the entire region. And similarly, you can just look at total volume together. So here we use the detector analytics in RITIS to go in and look at different sensors. And here we have the bridge collapse at this dashed line. The orange line is 2024 volumes. The blue line is 2023 volumes or counts. So you can see things were tracking pretty steadily between the 2 years until the bridge collapsed. And of course, things dropped pretty significantly. Maryland also subscribes to signal analytics tool sets. And so we haven't done a ton of this yet, but there is the ability to look at all of the signals near the different bridge crossings and be able to go in and look at how the changes in traffic patterns on these alternate routes are impacting turning movements and the timing plans that are there. The agency might need to consider retiming, giving more priority to certain turning movements and that sort of thing. So that's being worked on right now. It's still in the early stages. And then I mentioned that we are tracking maritime traffic as well. We've been doing this since about August of last year. So we now have the ability to go in and look at trends in different portions of the waterways around Maryland and beyond. So one thing that we've noticed is the number of vessels on the Patapsco was already near a 6-month low right before the bridge collapse, which was, probably a good thing. There are seasonal trends that we see in the waterways, but those are primarily driven by pleasure craft. So the brown, those are recreational vehicles. You can see they spike in the summer months, and then they go down throughout the winter, of course. There is a noticeable change around the collapse. So again, this dashed line that goes right through the center, that's when the bridge actually collapsed. So this blue line that's now highlighted, those are cargo ships. You can see the number of cargo ships decreases, obviously, they can't get to where they want to go. However, we see port operations vessels and other government ships go up, and these are largely response and recovery vessels that are moving into the area to try to clear the debris and get things moving again. So that's interesting. And then I mentioned it earlier, but the number of cargo vessels, it was already lower than normal, but now it's historically low. We've just never seen this before, and hopefully never will again. And so you see the Key Bridge collapse. There were far more exits of the port area than there were entries right before the bridge collapsed, which again was a good thing. People just were out of the area before this happened. At least the cargo vessels were. And then we're actually able to see where these vessels are going. So we're seeing, we initially saw that the Sparrows Point area didn't appear to immediately replace the other facilities past the Key Bridge. So if we look at that further out, we initially saw 20 ships that diverted to several other ports up and down the East Coast, and even way, way further south in South America, in San Luis. The other ports that we've seen people go to are Davisville, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Wilmington, Norfolk, and Jacksonville. The most going to Philadelphia, Wilmington, and the Norfolk region. And we're actually able to track these individual vessels. For example, this one vessel here in blue was originally headed up towards Baltimore, and then it turned around right on the 26th and said nope, and went down to Jacksonville instead and got there on the 28th. And we see similar things with other vessels. This one left on the 26th, initially bound for Baltimore, and then said, nope, we're going to go to New York instead. And I see this other one on the 25th, who was headed towards Baltimore. On the 26th, it said, nope, and went towards Philadelphia. And, the same thing happens over and over again. Here was one that was going up, and you can see it just said, we're going to hang out here for a bit. And it just kind of dropped anchor and waited around through the 29th and turned around and just went out of there. So we see all of that happening. And the last thing we're going to talk about is how roadway traffic has actually detoured around all of this mess. I will stop sharing and hand things over back to Jason and Greg.
Thanks, Michael. So I mentioned we'd set up detours. So one of the things that the State Highway Administration and the MDTA partner on is before an incident ever occurs, we develop what we call freeway incident traffic management plans, where we have established detour points. They identify the preferred routes, any signals that are impacted, like Michael mentioned. We'll make some adjustments. And then, but is that actually what traffic's doing? So we turned to the CATT lab and asked, hey, can you look at some origin destination data and try to figure out what the traffic's actually doing? What routes are they actually taking? And that's where Bob comes in.
Greg? Jason, you're handing it off to me, right?
Yes, sir. Sorry, Greg.
Okay, good. Share my screen. I'm going to go to here. Okay, and let's see. Is my screen showing now?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, I was talking about use of the trip analytics tool to look at the origins and destinations and routes of the vehicle trips, mostly freight trips, both before and after the loss of the Key Bridge. First on this, I'm going to do a freight analysis number 1, and that was simply to look back at the before condition and say, who are the normal users of this bridge? Where do they come from and where do they go to? So our method was simply to put a spatial filter, just put a polygon over the south side of the bridge and say, we want to find the pathways. We wanted all the pathways of the trips that went through that filter. and then proceeded to go through the one on the north side. So we're getting a directional flow of all the trips that we have available, the sample trips. And once we identify them, we can pull them out and see where they came from and where they went to. So this is called a select link analysis. The bridge is the select link, and we're trying to analyze who is using the bridge and where they're coming from or going to. So this is kind of a zoom in to show what that looks like. So let's just talk the destinations a month before the bridge loss. This is where they were going north of the bridge. So Baltimore is in the bottom down here. And these are all, in this case, this is a zip code analysis. And it has the percentage of the traffic that went across the bridge and has the distribution of where they went. And now we hit anything less than 1% to kind of clean it up a little bit. We also note that anybody that left the state of Maryland, we simply noted where it left the state and what the percentage was. So up here, we have 6% of the users of that bridge were actually leaving on I-95 into Delaware. So this is where they were going to. Now, where did they come from? And these are the areas around to the south of Baltimore where most of the trips came from, as might be expected. But we also had 3% that came into via the DC Capital Beltway on the north side from Virginia. And we had another 4% that came up 95 on the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. So these are the patterns of where they're coming from and where they're going to. The question now, because after the loss, how have these things changed and where are they moving? And what we're gonna do basically is find all the trips that crossed this screen line. And what this is this has the 2 tunnels and the bridge. But if you're not going to go through them, you may go through local streets in Baltimore, or you may go all the way out to 695. So we want to draw a screen line across all of these, find out what was normal before, and then find out what was normal after. Now, we would love to do a select link analysis, but we got a problem. There's 0 trips going across there. So if we say find all the trips after the bridge collapse from and to, we're going to come up with a big fat 0. How are we going to find how the users of the bridge have changed their patterns? Well, what we can do is we can create a few polygons. We've already figured out where those users are mostly going to and where they mostly came from. So let's use this information to create custom polygons that we can then make the from before and after, and the to before and after, in order to get the information that we're looking for. So that's the strategy to do a before after when you actually lose the link. Now, this next, I'm about to reveal the routes of all these trips, and it's really messy, so I'm going to show it to you anyway. These are the actual screen lines from the tools before you've got 34% on the Fort McHenry Tunnel, and after you have 48%, and then the Harbor Tunnel, you're done at 20% and went up to 30%, and of course the Key Bridge went from 30 down to 0. Well, we can clean that up and create a nice graphic that says these are our findings. Notice on the northwest side, very little impact of traffic actually going around the other way. Those hazmats that Jason was mentioning that cannot use the tunnel. But on a numerical basis, it didn't show a lot for this particular analysis. Local through the city went up a little bit, but there the Fort McHenry Tunnel actually went up to 62% and so on. So there's our northbound findings. Everything we've done here can also be done in the southbound direction, and we can find the southbound as well. And they're actually very similar, mirror in the other direction. So now we move to another analysis, and this is looking at that Sparrows Point we talked about before, where this is the terminal that is outside and therefore not blocked. And the question is before and after, and these, of course, are adjacent to the bridge that was lost, which is where they mostly want to go across. Where did they go after the cross? How did things change? So what we did is the spatial filter was around the Sparrows Point, Trade Point Trade America is the location. And then we drew a spatial filter that went all the way from I-70 and all the way down to the Bay Bridge, because in theory, they could have gone out around the other way. So let's find out how trucks are getting from Sparrows Point across the Patapsco River or its extensions. In other words, we want trips that went west or south. How did they get there? I'm going to skip over the setup, but basically we set up a study area for the counties around Baltimore. And then we put these filters on there, and these were the settings. And again, I'm just going to gloss over these. Here's the results. And this is basically an origin destination matrix, but we've taken the numbers and put them onto a map. So if 100% of the freight trucks are coming from Sparrows Point, where did they go? And beforehand, we had 19% going out I-70. We had 2% going over the Bay Bridge. We had 12% going down I-95. And then 50 and 450, you basically have another 13% going down there. Now, these are green colored here because when I go to the after, we're going to find that they don't change as percentage. They're still 19 and 2. However, notice here that I-95 has gone up to 25%, and these are dropped down to almost nothing, which makes sense. You're not getting access to Interstate 97 to drop down as easily as you did or up here. So it's much more natural to go down 95 once you get over to the Fort McHenry Tunnel. So just go back. This is the before, and this is the after. Before, after, and we have the flick. So that is that analysis. Now, that same analysis, we can look at the routes of those trips. This is all of the before routes, and this is all of the after routes. But what really gets interesting is when we start isolating certain points. So what I did is I clicked on I-70 out here, and it isolated all the trips that went through that point. And of those points, we can see the very thick part of this. This is the regular corridor before, and we have notice our screen line down here. We have 93% of the trips crossed at the Key Bridge, 1% used a tunnel, and 6% drove around the long way. Now, once we lost the main facility, look, the 93% is going to drop to 0. Where else did they go? So we're going to flip this over, and 43% now are going around the top of the Beltway, which actually makes a lot of sense if you're going to 70 because you're not going to pay a toll. It's longer travel time, but you're not going to pay a toll. And of course, you have the hazmats as well. But you also see a lot of working, trying to get into the tunnels. And a little bit later, we're going to show a focused analysis of these. But I'm going to flip through these different routes. Here's I-95 before, with the vast majority of those trips going over the Key Bridge, and that's 87%. Notice up here how it changes when we go to after. We have basically these trucks are coming up through the tunnel, and all of this information. We can look also at Maryland Route 3, which looped up out of there, and we also have the 97 before and after. So here's the look at how these different trucks change their routes. So, and here's the Bay Bridge, the last one of these. So now the question is, what is this local pattern looking like? You're zooming in on that north end. What we did is we used similar filters, but we basically just focused on the ones that went to the tunnels. In fact, we had a conversation with Jason and with Tom Jacobs. We talked about how exactly are the vehicles moving through this neighborhood to get from here over to 95. So this is kind of the master of what we found. And we have a screen line here, but, and of course, this is the zoom line. These are the freight trips after the closure. And if we zoom in, we're going to find out the vast majority of them were going through here. So you've got the 695 ramp slipping over to North Point Boulevard. That's where more than half the traffic took that ramp. 5% came up North Point Boulevard, and the other 16% stayed on 695 and went up over to the Beltway up to 95, up by up by White Marsh, and then coming down 95. So if we want to look at it, notice this spot. If I click on that and I zoom out and take a look at it, this is the route of those 55% of the vehicles that are going out that way. They take 695, they slip the ramp over to North Point Boulevard, exit to Eastern Avenue, and then they get on I-95 and away they go. So that's the majority of the trucks. And if we want to look at the next most prevalent route, we're talking here 12% of the traffic came up. This one is Dundalk Avenue, and we can see that there were different ways to get there. And I want to notice too that once I click these blue up in the table at the top, you know, they turn blue up there too. So if it says routes 5, 7, 16, 15, and 26, we can go up there and look at them. There's route 5 and 7. And then here is the number of vehicles that followed, medium trucks and heavy trucks. The average speed to make the trip, the length of the trip was 8 miles. And we actually have our 50%, our median travel time, 15 minutes with this route, 17 minutes with that route, and also a reliability calculation. And these are just the way to look at these trips. There's another, the next one is this coming up through Holabird Avenue. And we also have, see, 9, 10, 12, 19. These routes all went through here. So there's 9, 10, and 12. And if we want to, we can just click on 9 up here and just look at that route all by itself. And in the database, and then there's the average speed, travel time 15 minutes. And then we also have route 10, which is almost the same, slightly different. And it looks like the travel time, though, the 50% travel time was 21 minutes versus 17, which is interesting. And then the last one, 12, you actually had 17 minutes instead of 16. So these are the routes that were being used by the freight vehicles. If we repeat the same analysis for cars, but instead of coming from Sparrows Point, we come from Edgemere and the North Point communities over there, we find out that once again, they're doing what the trucks are doing. 95 exit ramp, North Point to Eastern Avenue. That's the majority of them. But you also have another 16% of them came up through Peninsula Expressway and worked their way over to 95 through this way. So that's the presentation, and I'm going to hand that back over to Jason.
All right, thanks, Greg. So obviously this is still an evolving incident. We are still collecting data. One of the things we're looking to do, the port is still in, not normal operation. So once we get the full channel back open, we look forward to looking at the data again to see how truck traffic may adjust. So we'll keep monitoring your questions in the chat, and I'll turn back over to Jesse.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, wow, just an incredible amount of great analysis there. We're running a little behind schedule, so we're going to transition quickly to Michael and Joel's presentation from TTI. But again, just encourage folks, if you have additional questions, to put those into the Q&A box. So go ahead, Michael and Joel, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Let me share my screen here. All right. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. Turn the video on. All right, everybody. Thanks for having us present and kind of share our work today. I'm Michael Martin. I've been at TTI just over 10 years, started in travel survey work and got a real taste of all this passive data stuff and meeting Michael Pax and their group along the way. Joel Thomas is going to co-present with me later on. And what we're going to be talking about is a request that came out of our San Antonio district here in Texas. And they were needing some help on this roadway, this intersection here. So FM means farm to market. You can think of a rural, kind of lower functional class roadway, but still maintained by TxDOT. So it's kind of the general network that you would see in a rural area. So FM 78 and 1044 is the intersection that the district was curious on getting some help with understanding could they help route traffic around. So let me give you a little bit more background on this. So there's long queues. This is the north section here for FM 1044 is coming from New Braunfels. New Braunfels is situated between Austin and San Antonio on I-35. Tremendous growth through that corridor, and particularly in New Braunfels and to the south of it. So just beyond this little map snippet here is quite a lot of residential. This roadway is still a Rule 2 lane, so it hasn't been changed to kind of match that growth along the way. We've seen increased crashes at this intersection, so it's a two-way stop with FM 78 being posted at 65 miles an hour. Center turn lanes for 78. We got a rail crossing on the north there with FM 1044, County Road to the south. So just a lot going on with increased traffic, heavy truck traffic as well. With all the construction going on, you get a lot of rock trucks, you get a lot of materials passing through this area, and also being so close to being situated actually right between I-10, Interstate 10 to the south, and I-35 to the north, you have a lot of industrial development around this area. And so a lot of truck traffic. Fast-paced growth, like I said. So the question coming from the district was rather simple, but we needed to do some investigation before we went out to try to answer it. And that was, could navigation map companies help route traffic around this location? So our follow-up question to that was, well, is the traffic local or external? Are we getting a lot of folks from around the, extended area coming from Houston or even Austin or beyond San Antonio coming through this intersection for whatever reason? If so, then yeah, maybe the navigation map companies could have an influence, but we wanted to get some good understanding what was going on at this intersection and the traffic patterns before we went out and asking, the likes of Google to help maybe route traffic around here. So TTI, we try to help folks, build capacity, know their options. TxDOT has purchased these three data offerings through their statewide data procurement. RITIS-NRIX, you very well know about that. That's why you're here today. But I'm going to also talk about some work that we did with the WEJO data, so the granular data. WEJO is no longer available, but some other companies are offering similar data these days. And then Replica is part of that as well. But like I said, I'm just going to focus on the top two here with NRIX. And Joel's going to get into those details, and I'll follow up with some WEJO stuff. Joel, I'll turn it over to you. I'll drive if you'll tell me when to go to the next slide.
Great, thanks, Michael. If you could, let's go ahead and get those points up. Great, thank you. So, hey everybody, Joel Thomas at TTI here. So like Michael said, we were really interested to understand what was going on at this intersection. And part of that analysis was taking kind of a 360-degree view. So we used a variety of different sources, a couple different platforms to really get the fullest picture possible. And so in our analysis, one of the questions that was asked was, is there a pre-existing platform that could, that's already available that could help us understand what's going on here? And as many of you know, that's why you're here today. The answer to that question is yes. RITIS' trips analytics platform, which I believe uses a lot of NRIX trips data, is an excellent source to answer all types of questions, but several that we looked at or we're considering with this intersection. So we looked into the tool and then scheduled a meeting with Greg Jordan. We love Greg. He was excellent with us and gave us a fantastic tutorial of the tool, showcasing all its capabilities and all the different things we could do. We initially came to him wanting to know if we could use the trip analytics tool basically as kind of a way to just do a simple origin destination study. So the visual on your right is essentially what we came to him with. We were wanting to know if, hey, can we use this tool to just draw a polygon and then classify trips, as basically to just get a simple series of turning counts or turning movement percentages. But little did we know that, yes, not only the platform can do that, but it can do so much more. And kind of the evolution of our question and experience with the platform really gave us some really powerful, really useful insights to get to here in just a moment. Next slide. Great. So I don't want to belabor this because I'm sure many on the call today are highly familiar with the tool. So, but I just want to walk you through a series of kind of how we set this up to then help make sense of some of the insights we were able to glean. So starting off, the platform prompts users to make a couple of different selections, one of which is to consider whether they want their analysis to be bounded or unbounded. Think of this as, how wide do you want to cast your net? For the purposes of our study, we had some previous analyses that showed that most of the trips passing through this intersection likely were not coming from inner San Antonio, but we wanted to capture really the activity between I-35 and I-10 that surrounded the intersection. So really, we were just looking at more kind of localized impacts. So we went with bounded, and then we opted to have the results to internally be displayed as traffic analysis zones, TAZs, and externally as TAZs as well. Next slide. So step 2, the platform prompts users to make a number of considerations with various filtering criteria and settings, all of which really help you kind of hone into that analysis and what you're looking for. So for the purposes of our study, we opted to have the data be reported via NREX's pathways option. We required vehicles to pass through our drawn polygon at some point in their journey. We allowed all vehicle types to be included in the sample, so light, medium, and heavy weighted. But we only examined vehicular traffic for the week of September the 11th through the 17th of 2022. This was a practical consideration really to just optimize the speed of the query. We did end up expanding that to a larger time range, but for the purposes of today, we really were just kind of looking at a week's worth of data just to start off. Next slide. So after initiating the query, we opted to have the results initially displayed as a zone map, which is what you see here. So this is the initial output. I know we saw some of this with Greg, but the zone map above depicts the output of our query by visualizing simultaneously both origin and destination density by traffic analysis zone, TAZ, throughout the study area. The shades of red or orange represent trip origins. The darker the red, the higher the density, whereas shades of blue represent trip destinations. Darker the blue, the higher the density. All trips visualized above were required to have crossed through our intersection of interest at some point in their journey. So the first thing that we took away from this is that you can see that there's the darkest TAZs are really in the center of our study area. And as you kind of move out from the intersection of interest, the TAZs start to get lighter and lighter and lighter. So to us, it was pretty obvious from the get-go, okay, it appears that most of the trips passing through this intersection likely are local ones. They're starting and stopping in TAZs that are pretty close to the intersection. But with that in mind, we were curious about a couple of other things. And so we opted to look into the route map, which we'll get to in here in just a second. So this is just a zoomed up version. So like I said, you can see that there's really like a big cluster. This really kind of emphasized that a lot of these appear to be local. Anecdotally, we had heard that just with kind of the ongoing developments in New Braunfels, lots of residential development just south there, which they thought was likely a pretty significant contributing factor to some of the queuing and other types of issues we were seeing at the intersection. Next slide. So, all right, the route maps, okay. So diving deeper into the data, we examined the distribution of unique journeys in the study area and noticed that 13 out of the top 20 most trafficked routes involve trips traveling either east or westbound along FM 78 before either going on to I-10 east of Seguin or starting or stopping their trip south of I-35 there in Schertz. Which we found pretty peculiar in a couple of different ways. But most telling was that within these 13 unique routes, 80% of the vehicular traffic was comprised of medium and heavy weighted vehicles, which was a pretty shocking finding to us. Now, while this is sample based, that was still highly beneficial for us. So all of a sudden, you know, starting to match the anecdotes and we're starting to see them in the data. You know, we had heard there was heavy truck traffic. We, you know, had heard, you know, there was lots of through traffic, making it difficult to turn onto 78, and now we're really starting to see it. But what was interesting about this specific route is like I said, a lot of these trips were getting on FM 78 and then merging onto I-10 east of Seguin, which was really peculiar because I-10, there's actually a much faster and more direct route to merge onto I-10 just south of Schertz. You can see the red oval there, which should be the more direct and the more optimized route. If that's ultimately what you're getting to, that quarter there is FM 18, by the way. And we were curious to know, why is it that all of these trucks are bypassing FM 18 altogether? If the ultimate goal is to get onto I-10, that would be the more obvious and the more efficient route to take. Well, we looked into it, and turns out that there's a section of I-10 south of Schertz that is undergoing a multi-year, very heavy construction project. TxDOT's doing some work there, and it's basically reduced the interstate for a significant section to 2 lanes with heavy barriers on both sides, which is a real recipe for a bit of a disaster, you know, when you're trying to move product pretty quickly, as most of these trucks are, because if there's one accident, that section of the interstate essentially turns into a parking lot. There's no shoulder, there's no room to maneuver. And obviously these trucking companies are aware of this. And so they have been instructing drivers, so we believe, basically to avoid FM 18 FM 18 altogether, and instead take 78 to then merge onto I-10 east of Seguin, which dovetails just kind of perfectly with the anecdote that we had seen. So all in all, the data and the insights we gleaned from this platform mirror results from other efforts that Michael will get into here in just a moment. But the strength of this tool and what we've really found is that it can be used by individuals without heavy data analytics or data science experience, all without sacrificing high quality, granular, and very actionable results.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joel. Yeah, you know, the goal was to help the San Antonio district, but it was also to help showcase the data that's at their fingertips. Since TxDOT procured this data, the engineers in those districts actually have access to this, you know, the TRIPS analytics platform, but they may not know about it, or they may not know how to use it. So much like this webinar today, everybody's here, you know, interested in learning. We tried to spread the word about these sort of products and put them to use. And so I think we'll see this more and more as we go along. I'm going to now talk to you a little bit about, kind of quickly go through here. I know we're running behind the WEJO data. Again, TxDOT did purchase WEJO movements and events across the state before they went bankrupt. We have 19 months of statewide coverage between these 2 months here, so November 2021 to May 2023. Passenger vehicle only, if you're not familiar with this data, it's largely from General Motors. The vehicle movements, like I said, is one data set. Those are the every 3-second breadcrumbs left behind by these vehicles. In our data set, that's 1.2 trillion points, so it's quite large. Every 3 seconds, location, speed, heading, etc. Driver events, so these are the sort of events that happen when a driver manipulates that vehicle, such as a hard brake, seatbelt click, on and off ignition, and so on and so forth. That's about 27 billion points, so quite another large data set, but it's not in the trillions. And there's some event examples like I mentioned. One of the uses that we had for this use case are turning movements, the WEJO movements. This is a more complicated route to go. Working with Greg Jordan, we realized that the Trip Analytics platform is much easier and really good at giving you turning movements as well. In this case, we wanted to use the WEJO data to get a little bit more detail on some of the speeds. And so in that we were already close to getting turning movements, and that's what you can see here, using the GPS coordinates and headings, using custom algorithm to, label those turning movements. We're able to get the turning percentages per leg, and showcase them here like so. This is to go beyond a little bit of the question that the district asks and help. Okay, we already see that majority of the trips are local, but what else can we give them to help them through managing the situation at this intersection? So having the turning percentages here, I think gave them more information to work off of in the time being. There is a design planned for this intersection for it to become signalized and some expansion of lanes, but that's about 1.5 to 2 years out. And so the more information we could give them right now, we felt that they would have to work with. The easier option, like I said, for these turning movements is RITIS's trip analytics. Replica is another TxDOT offering in TxDOT's data purchase, but it's only for signalized intersections in this case. Another use of the WEJO data was we were interested in the queuing, all this anecdotal evidence that there were very long queues for the southbound traffic coming down 1044. Because this is a pretty rural, lower functional class roadway, we didn't have any kind of pre-existing tool to show us what that queuing really looked like. So we used the movements here. For one day, we picked one. We looked at several days, but we picked this day in particular because it was exaggerated in terms of the morning and peak afternoon peaks. We used the GPS coordinates with their timestamps to look at how do those vehicles progress through down the leg here. These little boxes, these little blue boxes, are drawn every 100 feet to capture those points. So if we see that vehicle stop for any amount of time, we know that it's likely the back of the queue. So it's really the minimal queue length. We don't know because this is a sample if that's actually the back of the queue or not, but it gives us at least more information than we had. So the results, looking at the timestamp on the x-axis and the distance from the intersection, we can really start to see the morning peak here going about 0.4 miles back from the intersection. And then in the afternoon, much longer duration of queuing and even further back, almost approaching 0.5 mile. So, here again, it's just data backing up those anecdotal pieces of evidence that, yeah, you do got queues there and how far back they're actually going. So help trying to paint a more detailed picture for the district to work with. Minimum queue length, like I said, because we're working with a sample. We don't know if that's truly the back. And we were able to actually look at the origins and destinations of the vehicles in this queue. So much like what Joel showed us, we're able to select the vehicles that were in this southbound queue during these time periods of the morning and afternoon peak to see, okay, where are they really coming from? And here again, we see that this is mainly local traffic, particularly around New Braunfels. If we look here on the bottom maps, AM, PM peak, we can look at the origin destinations. They're very close to this intersection. So more evidence that probably going to a map navigation app company is not the solution. Another thing that the WEJO data gave us is speed profiles. Wanted to look at the approach speeds. FM78's at 60 marked or posted at 65, 1044 is at 60. So we see that the 85th is for 78 actually below the posted speed limit. And for 1044, we're actually pretty much at the posted speed limit. The 85th is. We can see that these profiles are a little stretched out on FM78, and so that's interesting because we can see the speed differential between the 85th and the 15th to see, what is the spread between our fast-moving traffic and our slow-moving traffic at this intersection. So kind of to wrap this up, and what are some of the results that we got from the WEJO data? We got the turning movements, the percentages by leg. We could see that a high percent of southbound traffic are turning out to be left turns. So those are going to be harder to flush through the intersection. queuing analysis, we had significant southbound queuing on local trips, and we could see that the vehicles that were choosing to be in that queue or use the intersection were primarily local trips. Speed profiles in the detail I just showed you. From the RITIS trip analytics, the OD analysis, that was very, very good and quick to use, and to see that most of the trips, again, were local. The indexing of unique routes, the route map that Joel showed us, those trucks were primarily coming from those industrial sites located on I-35 and going, we think, to Houston on I-10, but they were choosing a route that was kind of unexpected. We suspect because of the large amount of construction that's going on I-10. So that's forcing them, or they're choosing to go through that intersection, adding to the traffic. And the composition of vehicles being 80% of those sampled, choosing those top 13 routes being heavy trucks was also good to know. We did not know what was going through that intersection, and so more evidence to kind of work with in finding solutions. So the takeaways beyond the results was, there's a lot of tools available these days, and you don't have to go and custom create things if you don't want to. I mean, RITIS Trip Analytics was easy to use. We were able to get help from Greg Jordan to make sure we were using it appropriately. I know that Greg, I think you're offering office hours now for the TxDOT contract. Asking for help is always good. We want folks not only to come to us, we only have so much bandwidth, but to go to their consultants or to even learn the tools themselves by going to those office hours and learning how to actually, use the tools to their advantage. This is something that's just kind of a whole, we hear it every so often, and it's like planning tools. They're not really made for operations, but you can see for sure from all of the other presentation today, they certainly do have their use. And I would say it's unfair to categorize these things as just planning tools or operation tools. In this case, for us, it was very good to kind of take this OD analysis and see how that could give us a clearer picture of what's going on at this small little intersection that really probably no one notices unless you're stuck in the traffic. Layering the data, this is always the approach that I try to take with this stuff, is to build a more complete picture of what's going on out there, to layer information so that you better understand what's going on, as opposed to just, maybe one data source. And so just to add a little comedy here, that's a technique that we've seen for a while now. Certainly if you've watched anything from Bob Ross, he starts with the broad strokes and fills in the details as he goes to paint that picture. So let's make a happy little road together. And thanks again for having us today. I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, we're here to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks. Great presentation, and kudos for ending with a Bob Ross joke there. I love it.
Thank you.
But really great takeaways for everybody. So obviously our two presentations went a little longer than we expected today. So I think we're gonna skip past our clips analysis. Not sure if we have time for the working group updates or not. I don't know, Michael, Pack, if you want to maybe jump into the polls that we have. We do have a couple of polls that we want to have, and I don't know if it's possible, maybe Bob can hit some highlights while we're doing that, see if we can make that work.
Yeah, sure. So as most of you know, our enhancements working group, we help the CATT lab prioritize improvements and additional features in RITIS, and we funded a lot of projects recently and last couple of years. Here's a list of them. This isn't a complete list. Many of you have seen these before. We've gone over some of these in past meetings. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, you got it. You already did. Okay, sorry. And we have other funding sources as well. And Michael, can you go back to the previous slide for a minute? There we go. We have other funding sources as well. These are all great improvements too. even include tracking ships and planes, as Michael mentioned in the key bridge presentation. Next slide. Okay, so here's a list of what we're working on now. You know, they're all in various stages of completion and funding. Let's review some of those with the green arrows. Let's see, here's the first one. This is API enhancements for XD segments. These enhancements now are possible because CATT Lab's upgraded to a new API. So that is a good development there. Next slide. Just try to go through these quickly. So in the PDA suite, now you're able to choose from available volumes, whether it be INRIX, or your own DOT, if you've supplied those to the CATT Lab, or NPM RDS or other sources, and you can download these into a file for additional analysis. Next slide. Weather data enhancement. Soon you'll be able to overlay weather data on the congestion scans, so you can see any correlation between weather events and increased congestion. This should be done by the end of this month, along with the documentation. Next slide. Mirroring of XD selections. This builds on the recent improvements for route selection, where you can pick the endpoints of the roads rather than having to type in a road or search for it. And this hopefully will be out in a month or so from completion. Next slide. This is RITIS best practices. This is based on Oregon's best practices for RITIS. This was a presentation probably some of you saw at the last RITIS group meeting in February. CATT Labs borrowed a lot of ideas and concepts from this to make a more generic version of a handbook for all agencies. A lot of interest here in this type of handbook, and thanks again to Oregon DOT for helping us out on this one, starting us out. Next, you got it here. Okay. Remaining enhancements. These are some remaining from the first list. Some have been costed out. Many still need funding. The big one is the automated work zone reporting. That was a big pick, but it's only partially funded. We still need money for that. Embedding dashboards. You can save dashboards as various graphic files, so you can insert them into reports in whatever software you're using. Still need more money for that. You see the other ones here. We don't have time to go through, so let's advance. Yeah, here's the work zone reporting tool. We've got a design review group who've made suggestions and to have the preferred metrics automated, so you can just choose a template and it will automatically populate a lot of this information. And last slide, I think. So these are just a quick list of some other improvements since February. The map-based search is great. That's kind of just like Google Maps, where you can type in an address and the map will zoom right to that area. And I think is that the last slide? I think that's it. We're already over time, but
yeah, one other thing I'd like to mention before we go is the cause of congestion tool and the user delay cost tools all require agency data, specifically your volume data. And we need agencies to start putting together volume data sets for this current year. The due date is October 1st, which seems like a long way away, but it's not. It's going to sneak up. So please reach out if you have any questions about how to get your volume data to us. It's critical to make these tools work for you.
yeah, and I think there's only like 8 or 9 DOTs, Michael, that have submitted their volume data to the CATT lab. It's not very many.
Yeah, it's
At this point.
smaller. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, everybody. A lot of information as always. Appreciate everyone's input today. Hopefully you had a chance to answer some of those polls. Thanks, Bob, for running through all those updates very quickly. As always, a lot going on. And definitely appreciate the 100 or so folks that hung on a few extra minutes for us here. Thanks for your attendance today and look forward to seeing you next time.